Hello, my name's Jason. I'm not an archaeologist, but I do play one on TV. So come join me as we go into the dust.
For me, of course, the Stonehenge breakthrough was really one of those relational analogies with my colleague Ramili Sonina coming to Britain, and I thought he'd like to see some of our stone megalithic monuments. We'd been studying them, he and I, in southern Madagascar, but he's also from a family of megalith builders himself in central Madagascar. So his very simple observation, which just became the guiding hypothesis for what is now well over 20 years of research. It's been nearly a quarter of a century now. And he noticed, he just said, well, look, surely it's like Madagascar. Stone is for the ancestors, and we build in timber and perishable materials for the living. Is this not what we're seeing here? And I laughed at first because it seemed too neat. But then the more I thought about what we actually knew, it made me realize that actually, yes, well, our Stonehenge landscape does indeed have circles of timber at one end of the river and a circle of stone, Stonehenge itself, down the other. And maybe he's got a point there. And I think that just led to a moment of, wow, what if? What if that's really the case? And the great thing was, it was a testable proposition. That was one of the great things about the new archaeology, was that you could actually test ideas. So, although I became a post-processualist, I think it was realizing with the fullness of time that we actually embrace all sorts of different aspects of what at the time were the theory wars, which side were you on and which side were you not. So it was out of that I realized that I had to find out. We could set it up as a hypothesis and a theory, but there were very practical, realistic expectations. If we went to dig where the timber circles were, would we find that they were indeed to do with the living? Was Stonehenge actually not to do with the living? Was it actually where the remains of the dead might be found? And these things were vaguely understood, but there were no certainties at that particular point. And I just thought, well, I'm pretty junior in this world. This was, 25 years ago. It needs somebody senior to go and do that. And sat and waited, and nobody came forward. There was lots of arguing. There was lots of name calling, and people saying that's the worst idea I've ever heard. Others said that's really quite interesting. But by 2002, I realized that nobody was actually prepared to go and investigate that landscape and see if what we were saying was a crock of rubbish or if there was actually some mileage in it.
So let's get right into the heart of the matter, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, as you were. So most people don't realize Stonehenge is part of a whole sort of ceremonial landscape. And what you were referring to just there is Woodhenge, right? Which is a similar type of, I guess, construction as Stonehenge, but made of wood, right? It's concentric circles, I think, standing up. And that's a little bit of a distance away. Now, how did you actually get the permission to dig there? And then tell us about the project.
Yes, and it wasn't easy. I think one of the best pieces of advice was a colleague of mine who's now a professor, Colin Richards. And I'd said to him, Colin, I'd really like it if you were able to join us on the team as a co-director. And Colin said, yeah, that's great, but this is big. This actually needs a whole team of experts, not just the two of us. So, we asked Josh Pollard, Chris Tilley, and Julian Thomas, and latterly Kate Wellham, if they'd actually be part of the management of the project. So I think that was really important in establishing sufficient credentials. And then we were very lucky with the government organisation, English Heritage, which, of course, their job at the time was to preserve and present ancient monuments, because the Ancient Monuments Inspector was well disposed to what we were doing. We'd also arrived just at the time when the 20th century excavations of Stonehenge had finally been written up and published. There was also a new management plan, a research priorities document. So it was this, everything was in place for a major new initiative of research. We were extremely lucky in just hitting that point in time and having the support. And again, I'd been, until 1990, I'd been myself an inspector of ancient monuments for English Heritage. And it was, knowing the ropes, knowing the procedures, the personalities, how you actually get to apply and successfully to dig at a site of international significance. But I won't say it was easy. I've often said if I knew how difficult it was before we started, I probably wouldn't have done it. But there we go, yes.
So briefly, let's hear a little bit more about your interpretation of the site and how that differs from others. If you ask the layperson, I think most people, if we set aside the ancient aliens, most people would say Stonehenge is a calendar, right? When something to do with, eclipses. So what's briefly your interpretation and, the main competing others?
Yes. Well, I think it was the realization that working with Clive Ruggles, who's a professor of archaeoastronomy, and Clive said, well, there are important astronomical alignments at Stonehenge, but the point is they're not precise. Stonehenge isn't an observatory. It isn't a calendar as such. It's merely a monument that is actually celebrating those particular aspects. And he was very critical of the ideas of Gerald Hawkins, whose famous mid-60s book Stonehenge Decoded puts out the idea that it could have been used for solar and lunar eclipse prediction, that sort of thing. And I think it was realizing that it's as a monument that we have to really see its significance. That it's not the temple that people like William Stukeley and John Aubrey thought in the 17th and 18th centuries, that it's it's basically a building site that people come to every few hundreds of years and rebuild and tart up. Yes, for the first half of its life, it is indeed a burial ground. And I think it was realizing that we could actually see it as part of a joined-up landscape, because that really wasn't possible with those older theories, that its significance lay in the connection of Stonehenge to the river. And of course, further upstream, there is not just Woodhenge, but the entire complex of Durrington Walls, which has another two large timber circles, and as we were to discover, a major settlement complex, and that itself had an entirely undiscovered avenue, which also had solstitial alignment, not to the midsummer sunrise and midsummer sunset, so midwinter sunset in the opposite direction as at Stonehenge, but in the other direction, midsummer sunset, midwinter sunrise. So it was realizing that these were kind of two halves of a single complex was, for me, yes, a massive breakthrough. We'd been trying to study these monuments in isolation, and I think that's where so many interpretations have gone wrong, is they treat Stonehenge devoid of its actual landscape context.
So in short, it's sort of a ceremonial landscape which is divided into the space for the living and the space for the dead. And this was a place where the Bronze Age people or Neolithic people of Britain would come together and its use might have changed over time, but they would sort of reenact some sort of life way.
Yeah. Well, I think we've really got a good handle on the very long term now. And going back over 500 years before Stonehenge was even built, the area immediately to the southwest of Stonehenge just happens to have the densest concentration of Neolithic burial mounds anywhere in Britain. And it's realizing that this is a space that's already got a particular symbolism. And then when, of course, we get to Stonehenge itself, it goes through a series of major building transformations over something like 1,500 years. So it was being able to suddenly we could read that landscape through time. And I think one of the most exciting things was that the prediction of Ramili Sonina, my Malagasy colleague, was to say, well, there's a domain of the living and a domain of the ancestors. So Stonehenge in stone is the place of permanence for the eternal memory of the ancestors. And of course, part of this is also wrapped up with the monumentalization of the astronomy, because it's also relating to eternal movements. And then I think another big breakthrough in 2008, digging at Stonehenge, was the discovery that the Stonehenge Avenue, which leads out on that solstice axis, underneath it, we discovered earlier earthworks on that alignment. And to our amazement, it was the realization that they were not built by people. These were natural landforms that they'd actually modified and embellished a line in the land which was on that solstitial axis. So I think it was that realization that they're doing a number of complicated things, that what's up in the heavens, the moon and the sun's movements, which are eternal, they're also seeing their link to the land itself. And that was a really important breakthrough, as much as finding out that Durrington Walls, with its timber circles, was actually the place where everybody was hanging out. And I often say to people, for us, Stonehenge is very big and impressive, but for them, all of the huge timber circles, all the houses, and the major structures in wood at Durrington Walls and Woodhenge would have been the most impressive part. We just don't see the wood anymore because it's long gone.
Yep. Well, yeah, I think the interpretation has gained wide acceptance now. I promise I won't cut that bit out. I won't cut that bit cleverly about it wasn't built by people, because that could be an interesting ancient aliens theory. But in any event, hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.